여러분 안녕하세요. 뉴욕 초대 한국문화학교에 온 것을 환영합니다. 저는 김찬송 선생님이고요. 무궁화반을 맡게 됐어요. 올 학기에 같이 즐겁게 한국어를 배워요. 시작해볼까요? 오늘은 우리가 가족 부르는 법을 배우고 자기소개와 가족을 소개하는 것도 배울 거예요. 그 다음에 이야기 읽기 연습을 할 거예요. 선생님이랑 이제 같이 읽어볼까요? Let's read together. This dialogue is between Minsu and Mina. You will be Minsu and I will be Mina. 민수가 친구들한테 가족 사진을 보여주고 있어요. Minsu is showing his friends a family picture. So let's read their dialogue. Are you ready? Let's read. 이 사람은 누구입니까? Were you able to follow along? If so, let's move on. Just like we have read before, Minsu were able to identify the different people in his family. So let's learn how to say that for our family. On our mother's side, we will call our grandma and grandpa 외할머니 and 외할아버지. In your dad's side, you would say 할아버지 or 할머니. Your mom you will call 어머니 or 엄마, and for your dad you would say 아버지 or 아빠. Now, how do you call your siblings if they are older or younger than you? Let's learn. How can we call our older and younger siblings? If you are a boy, you will say 형 to your older male sibling. For your older female sibling, you would say 누나. If you are a girl, you will say 오빠 to an older male sibling. And you would say 언니 for your older female sibling. And if you're a boy or a girl, it's the same rule, or the same rule applies for when it is your younger sibling. However, there is no distinction on whether you are a girl or you are a boy. Rather, it's on if they are a girl or if they are a boy. So, if you have a younger brother, you would say 남동생. If you have a younger sister, you would say 여동생. And this is the same for if you are a boy or a girl. Here are some keywords that we'll be using today for our chapter. Let's learn. Let's read our first word. 사람. 사람. 사람 means person. 분. 분. This is the honorific counting classifier for people. 명. 명. This is your counting classifier for people, not the honorific. And lastly, 말이. 말이. This will be the counting classifier for animals. Let's try practicing now. Let's learn how to use our keywords. We're going to complete the sentence using the words in the box. Let's look at number 1. 이 모모는 우리 아버지입니다. What would we use here? What can we use here? What are we trying to say? We're trying to say this person is our father. What can we put in the blank to make this sound correct? We would use 이 분은 우리 아버지입니다. Were you able to get that? Very good. Let's move on to number 2. 우리 가족은 5 blank입니다. This sentence is trying to say there are 5 people in our family. So how can we say that there will be 5 people? What is the counting classifier for people? If you said 명, you are correct. 우리 가족은 5명입니다. Then let's look at number 3. 이 모모은 우리 언니입니다. What can we put in here? we're trying to say this person is our older sister. What would you put in here? I would put 사람. 이 사람은 우리 언니입니다. Very good. Now let's move on to number 4. 여기 사과 두 모모가 있습니다. Now, what are we trying to say? We're saying there are 2 apples here. What is our counting classifier for an object? If you said K, you are right. 여기 사과 두 개가 있습니다. Now let's move on to number 5. 우리 집에 강아지 한 모모가 있습니다. What is our counting classifier for animals? We would use 마리. 우리 집에 강아지 한 마리가 있습니다. Were you able to get everything correct? If so, let's move on. We're now going to learn how to formally declare something and also formally ask and also reply. To formally declare something, such as I am, and then I would say I am 찬송, you would say 저는 찬송입니다. How would you say your name, or how would you introduce yourself? You would say 저는, and then your name, 입니다. Let's look at our second sentence for the example that you can see on the screen. 이분은 우리 어머니입니다. This person is my mother. 저분은 우리 할아버지입니다. That person is my grandpa. Something that you should note is that 이분 means this person, while 저분 means that person. Now that we know how to formally declare something, let's also learn how to ask and also reply. Let's look at our first example. 가족이 몇 명입니까? How many people are in your family? As you can see, when you declare something, you would say 입니다. However, when you are asking something, you would use 입니까. Let's look at our second sentence for our example. 학교에서 무엇을 합니까? What do you do at school? Now, if you want to reply in a formal way, you would say 저는 공부를 합니다. I study. This is another way of you being able to declare that I study, that this is a firm thing you're doing. Okay, let's move on. There are some rules that you have to be aware of when you're using 씁니다 or 까 or 씁니까. We would use 씁니다 or 씁니까 when you want to say someone is doing something in a formal sentence. For example, 책을 읽습니다. And number 2, another rule is that if the word has a 받침, you would use 씁니다 or 씁니까. Let's look at our example. 뭘 하고 있습니까? Your reply would be 먹고 있습니다. Do you see how because there is 받침, you would just use 씁니까 and 씁니까? Well, this rule changes if there is no 받침 in your word. If there is no 받침, you would take out 시읒 and 으 and just add in 피읍 on your verb. Let's look at our example. 학교에 무엇을 합니까? 공부를 합니다. Why don't you pause this video and read this one more time on your own? And let's move on to some sample questions. Let's learn how to use what we just learned in a sentence. And let's look at number 1. 이분은 누구? 뭐뭐뭐? And your answer is 우리 할아버지입니다. What do you think this sentence is trying to say? Or what do you think is the question? I think that this question is asking, who is this person? So how can we write that in a sentence? We would say, 이분은 누구입니까? Were you able to get that? Very good. Now let's move on to number 2. 이 사람은 누구입니까? 우리 형 뭐뭐뭐. How do you say this is my older brother? You would say 우리 형입니다. Now let's look at number 3. 동생은 무엇을 합니까? What is the younger sibling doing? What do you see him doing? I see him exercising. So how can we write that in Korean? We would write it like this. 운동을 합니다. He is exercising. Why don't you try these next 2 questions on your own? Please pause this video and play it again when you are done. Were you able to get your answers? Let's see if you got them correct. Number 4 starts off as 보람이는 뭐뭐뭐뭐 밥을 먹습니다. What would be our question? 무엇을 합니까? And for number 5, your answer was 우리 누나입니다. So our question should be, who is this person? And we would write it like this. 이 사람은 누구입니까? Who is this person? Were you able to get these 2 prompts correct? If so, let's move on. Now that we have finished our grammar structure, we're going to try reading a book together. 이제 우리가 문법을 배웠으니까 우리가 읽기 연습을 할 건데요. 선생님이 준 책을 열어보시면 첫 번째 이야기예요. If you open the book that I gave you in our class packet, you will see the story 우리 할머니를 소개해요. Please open to the first story of the book and let's read. I'll be reading it to you, so you just need to follow along on your book. Let's start.
우리 할머니를 소개해요. 내가 가장 사랑하는 가족, 우리 할머니를 소개할게요. 내게는 할머니가 한 분 계세요. 2 팔을 벌려 나를 꼭 안아주실 때 우리 할머니는 솜이불 같아요. 푹신푹신하고 따뜻한 느낌이 정말 좋아요. 나를 바라보며 활짝 웃으실 때 우리 할머니는 보름달 같아요. 둥글둥글한 얼굴과 환한 미소가 정말 좋아요. 옛날에 말이야 하고 이야기를 들려주실 때 우리 할머니는 재미있는 그림책 같아요. 도깨비 방망이 이야기가 정말 좋아요. 할머니 어릴 때 사진은 내 얼굴 같아요. 동글동글한 눈매, 오뚝한 코가 나랑 꼭 닮았어요. 그래서 우리는 가족이에요.
선생님이 읽어준 이야기는 재미있었나요? Did you enjoy the story that I read to you? If so, let's try answering the questions that you see on the screen. It is also at the end of the storybook that I have given you. 할머니에게는 어떤 모습이 숨어 있다고 했나요? 알맞은 그림을 골라서 동그라미를 쳐보세요. What has the little girl said is similar to her grandma? Circle the ones that you know is correct. So take some time to look back into the story and circle the things the little girl has mentioned about her grandma. What are some things that the little girl mentioned about her grandma? The 3 things you should have circled is 그림책, 보름달, and 솜이불. 그림책은 할머니의 이야기들이고 보름달은 할머니의 얼굴이고 솜이불은 할머니의 품입니다. The little girl said her grandma's stories are like picture books. Her face is as bright as a full moon, and her hugs is as warm and soft and cozy as a cotton blanket. Were you able to get all of this correct? If so, let's move on to our next question. 이제는 할머니와 할아버지를 떠올려 볼 건데요. 할아버지랑 할머니는 무엇과 같나요? 그림으로 그리고 그 이유도 이야기해 볼 거예요. What do you think of when you think of your grandma and grandpa? What do they remind you of? Let's try drawing those two things out on our paper and also write down some of the reasons why we thought of these objects when thinking of our grandma or grandpa. You can also choose a different family member or also a friend if you want to. So let's do this on our own. Please draw a person and also two objects that reminds them or reminds you of them, and write down why this is so. And with that, we are done with our class today. I hope you had a very fun time in our class, and I'll see you next week. 안녕!